Okay, hi guys, it's Ivan from the EV Stock channel here, and today I've got a special guest, Gjorgjievski from the Limiting Factor. So, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me back.
Great. So, today we're going to be covering our estimates for 2020 in terms of what we think Tesla can produce and sell. And to kick things off, Jordan, maybe you can tell us about Tesla's guidance. Maybe that would be a good spot to start off with.
Yeah, that is a good place to start. They've given several different sets of numbers and indications. The primary one and the lowest one was from the earnings call, where they advised of at least 500,000 vehicles for this year. So that's 500,000 plus, and I think they're being very conservative there. They've sandbagged that a lot. I think Elon and the team have realized how much it benefits them to sandbag things rather than shoot for the stars. They can still have those targets internally. But Elon has also mentioned several times that he wants to ramp at least 50% a year, 50% a year or more. So I think that's a more realistic target if you're just looking at it from the macro scale. And then in the Q4 earnings letter, they advised of a run rate of 640,000 for the first half of the year and 740,000 vehicles annualized for the second half of the year. So average those out, that's about 690,000 vehicles capacity that they have for 2020.
Okay. All right. Well, there's a bit of a discrepancy there between the low end and high end, so that's going to make an interesting year.
Yeah, there's a lot of factors there.
Yeah. Well, let's start off with Model S and X, and I'll start off by getting your take in terms of how many you believe they're going to be able to produce and sell.
Yeah, I'm thinking I believe last year it was something like 75,000, and I think it's going to be the same this year. The 75,000, I think the first half of the year is going to be slow, but I think the second half of the year they're going to be running at maximum capacity. The reason why the second half of the year I expect it to be big is due to the rumors of Plaid mode. And, well, not just rumors, but Elon has said Plaid mode will release later this year. And hopefully, I think they're going to put it out earlier. I think it's probably going to be mid-year.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think I'm more on the lower end. I think about 60,000, and that's pretty much due to the cannibalization of the Model S and in particular the X by the Model Y.
Okay.
And also with Plaid model, I mean, there'll be a lot of people holding off for purchases. So I think it could be a slow year for Model S and X until Plaid comes out.
That's one thing that I didn't factor in, cannibalization by the Model Y. But I don't know if there's going to be cannibalization that soon. I think maybe like in the fourth quarter, some cannibalization might start, but they have such a large back order for Model Ys.
Yep.
I think they're not going to be able to catch up to that yet. And much like the Model S didn't start cannibalizing the Model 3 until about 18 months after its release, my view is it's probably going to be the same. I do expect the Model Y to cannibalize at a later point, but not, if this year, it's going to be later this year. Yeah.
Okay, now that's interesting. All right, well, that covers Model S and X. Let's start off with, let's continue on now with Model 3. And what are your estimates for Model 3? Say how many they can produce, and I assume what they produce, they're going to sell.
Yeah.
So looking at, not including China, so pretty much the rest of the world and what's coming from Fremont.
Yeah. So just coming out from Fremont, my guess is 400,000 Model 3s per year. I think the run rate at the end of 2019 was something like 350 to 370,000, something like that. I don't know the exact figure, but my assumption is they're going to continue to tighten the screws a little bit and get better productivity. And they also mentioned they were getting some additional equipment later on in the year. So I'm guessing 400,000.
Okay.
And what about you? What do you think they're going to hit?
So they ended the year in Q4 producing 6,689 Model 3s per week. I believe that in 2020, Tesla will average about 7,500 Model 3s produced per week, and
Okay.
that will give them about 364,000.
All right. So what was if you annualize the rate at the end of 2019, what were they sitting at?
Okay, so if you annualize those numbers, it would come out to about 347,000.
Okay. So,
So actually, now that you ask that question, it does make me sort of rethink my numbers a little bit because I'd have Tesla only making about 20,000 more for the year.
mm,
I think that's what they might do, only with the focus on Model Y. So
mhm.
I think they may push it up to about, say, the 364 in 2020, and then they could push it up north of 400 in 2021 if the demand is there.
Yeah. And one thing I'm not taking into account is how many cells they're going to divert to other projects like the Model Y, the Semi, etc. So,
Yep.
it may not simply come down to production. It may come down to where they want to divert their cells to. Part of the reason why I set my figure so high for Model 3 is they can get more cars per each number of cells for the Model 3 than any other vehicle. And if your goal is to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy, I think it makes sense to put to put as many cars out as possible.
Okay. Well, the
Yeah.
other thing that I was just thinking as you mentioned that was one other area that the Model Y will cannibalize will be the Model 3. So you
Yeah.
may have a lot of people holding off buying a Model 3 in order to buy a Model Y. So demand may not be there for Model 3 when you have Model 3 and Model Y. Collectively, they're going to grow
Mhm.
massively, but the favor or the balance may sway towards Model Y.
Well, that depends on how high they get their Model Y production rate, which I think it's not really going to ramp until later on in the year. So
Yep.
I'm not anticipating uh, too much drain from the Model 3s
Okay.
when they release the Model Y. And you have to take into account that Europeans, at least my understanding is Europeans tend to prefer a car, or at least cars are a lot bigger over there. And that's where a lot of Tesla's demand is coming from at the moment. And probably one thing worth noting is I expect the split between uh, the rest of the world, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, in the United States, I expect that to be a 50-50 split. And
Okay.
that's pretty much the way it was last year. And the reason why I expect that is because every quarter they have to do this way. For the first 6 weeks of the quarter, they're just cranking out as many cars as they can for Europe. And then the second 6 weeks, they're just cranking out for North America.
Yep.
So I think that's going to continue until they create Gigafactory Berlin.
Yep. But just one thing to note that in the second half of 2019, there's been a divergence between Model S and X sort of sales.
Yeah.
So Model X have been outselling Model S's, especially in the last 6 months of 2019. The
Mm.
first 6 months of 2019, they were pretty close, but now we're seeing a bit of a divergence, and I think it's because of the Model 3.
Yeah, I agree. Um, but my views, I think it'll start, that'll kick in later in the year. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know
Mm.
if that's right or not, but that's my gut feel at the moment.
Okay. All right. Well,
Yeah.
we'll see how that plays out. Now, moving on to China. And first of all, I'll get your input or
Okay.
your.
So China, I'm thinking, and this probably seems like a really low ball estimate. I think it's going to be about 75,000, and that's my foul weather scenario. I think they're max out at about 100,000 cars for the year, maybe 110 if they're lucky. But one thing I noted on the investor call is they mentioned that they'd be shut down for a few weeks for the coronavirus, but I think that's optimistic thinking, unless they put everybody in hazmat suits and get them to work that way. But
Yeah.
because SARS was about 15 years ago, something like that, the virus hit very hard for about
Yeah.
3 months, and the entire thing lasted about 6 months. Now, coronavirus isn't as deadly, but it is much more contagious. So I think it's going to cause more problems than they anticipate. And
Okay.
on top of that, they have, I think, one shift trained so far, and they still need to train, I think, another two shifts. I think it's going to take some time for that to happen. I think it's also going to take some time to reorganize parts from China rather than other areas in the globe. That might cause some issues.
Yep.
So, yeah, all those things combined, I'm thinking 75,000. Worst case scenario, best case scenario, about 100,000.
Okay. Well, in my estimates that I had prepared, I had 120,000,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll tell you my reasoning behind that.
Oof.
So first of
Yeah.
all, and this is probably excluding the coronavirus, so
Mm-hmm.
we'll see that could, massively, affect these numbers. So the first thing I want to point out, the top selling EV in China was the BAIC EU series. They sold 111,000 for the year in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
That car is priced at 30,000. The Model 3 is priced at around 50,000. So what I think Tesla's going to do is they're going to use up all their reservation orders, get them built out, sell them at 50,000 because all they have to do is build those cars and they can sell them.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as they churn through those reservation holders and the people that have put a deposit, I've been hearing rumors that Tesla's going to drop their price by 20%, which would put the price at around 40,000. By lowering the price, you're going to massively increase demand. And when you look at a $40,000 price tag, you have to ask yourself what cars are at a similar sort of price level that are comparable to a Tesla in China. And there are two. You've got the BMW 3 Series and the Mercedes C-Class. They're priced in the mid-40s. The BMW 3 Series, they sold around 109,000 in 2019. The Mercedes C-Class sold 154,000. And they're not even electric. So from a demand point, I think 120 would be pretty easily achievable for Tesla. They can even push up to 150, going
Yeah.
full.
What was baked into my assumption is that they wouldn't have any demand issues. To me, it's a supply side thing. So I think it's an interesting point that once they get everything their supply chains recentered around China, I think they're going to lower the price despite what they said. But yeah, I think it's mainly going to be a supply constraint. Sunny weather, I think it potentially 120,000, but yeah, my high end would probably be 100, I would say.
Okay.
Mm.
Okay. No, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So moving on to the Model Y. And what are your thoughts for that?
Model Y was probably the most difficult one for me. I would say, I may be lowballing it, 50,000 cars. Because A, they have to ramp production. B, they mentioned that they'd be getting a lot of equipment the second half of the year. And I think most of that equipment is going to be dedicated to the Model Y. And I think what they're going to do is, because I expect that they're going to continue to be somewhat cell constrained, I think they're going to produce a decent amount of Model Ys, but focus on the higher end trims and get those out the door. And maybe, 3 to 6 months after they've begun production, start opening up other models. I think there's going to be plenty of demand for the high end versions of that.
Yep.
So, yeah, 50,000 may be low, but it seems fair taking into account Model 3's production ramp, which I think it took them over a year, well over a year to hit 50,000. And we're talking about maybe 9 months for the Model Y.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my estimates might have actually surprised me, and I'm estimating potentially 158,000. And that would be if they were to produce at a rate of, say, 200 per week,
Mm-hmm.
Q1, 2,000 per week in Q2, 4,000 per week in Q3, and 6,000 per week in Q4. Now, Elon Musk has mentioned that Model Y is going to be a manufacturing revolution. We've all heard about the wiring harnesses, the casting machines, which are going to drastically, improve the manufacturing process. So I believe if they've got the cell constraint, they've learned their lessons from the initial Model 3 ramp. They've, built out the new production lines in China. They've learned a lot of things. So if they start ramping Model Y production, really say start of Q2 in 2020, I see no reason why they couldn't hit that number. It seems massive, but I wouldn't put it past them. I think that's probably what Tesla would have, as their internal targets. And I don't have any reason to think they can't do it. Sure, something could come up.
Yeah.
But that's just my estimate for the time being.
I think that's just as I think that's a fair estimate as well. At the beginning of the year when I was first kind of gaming this out, that's what I was thinking around that type of figure. But I haven't heard any rumors about increases in cell supply. They've been cutting agreements, but that's mainly been in China. So,
yep.
And also taking into account they need to divert some cells for semi. Yeah, that's a tough call. So, just out of curiosity, what was the approach you took to coming up with these numbers? Did you did you have an end target in mind and work towards it? Or did you bottom up or top down? How did you come to your figures?
So pretty much just based on what Elon said about starting sort of limited production in Q1. So I started off pretty low. 200 per week sounds reasonable.
Okay.
But once you start off from there, it's like, how fast will they ramp? Like, what's the limiting factor here, as your show is called?
There we go. It's catching on.
Yeah, so I was thinking, what could it be? I was thinking number one is battery, cell supply. But really, I don't think, I think they should be able to ramp production pretty quickly, considering they've already done it with Model 3. They know what to do. The issues that they had with Model 3, I don't see any of these issues coming up again. So I just see them smoothly ramping production as long as they're not constrained by any parts, suppliers, or anything else that I haven't considered.
Well, there's one inconsistency I saw in the capacity figures when I was looking through their earnings report. And that was that they said they had a combined capacity for 400,000 Model 3 plus Model Y. Now, you provided the numbers earlier as somewhere around the mid 300s that they were already producing for the Model 3. So I would like to think that the initial capacity for Model Y would be greater than 50,000. It seems like there's a missing piece of information there, and that's probably the key clue to me that perhaps there's a cell supply issue. They didn't want to put those capacity numbers too high because, without the cells to feed the equipment, you're not going to produce the cars. Yeah. So all up, I think we've covered off all the factories and all the models. So my total was, the semi, yeah. So what was your target for that?
I thought that they'll pretty much start production in Q4, and they'll make about 500 for the year. And just looking at my numbers, so if they're going to do 500 in Q4, that would be about 38 per week. That's about 5.5 per day, which looks like a good way to sort of start production.
Yeah. Mine's pretty low as well, but I'm thinking that they kick that off in the third quarter rather than the fourth quarter. But the original number I put down was 150. But
Yep.
After thinking about that, it seems like they would need to ramp more quickly than that to not be getting a negative margin on it. They have to hit a certain amount of run rate to cover their equipment, staff, etc. So I think they're probably going to ramp harder than the 100 that I originally guessed. But I'm still guessing pretty low, maybe 250 or 300. But bearing in mind that each one of these is going to be the equivalent of 10 to 15 Model 3s in terms of batteries. So that's the equivalent of 2,500 to 3,000 Model 3s.
Yep.
Yeah, and once again, like I said earlier, I think they're going to try to put out as many small cars as possible rather than put out vehicles that have big battery packs.
Okay. So, all right. So pretty much in summary then, I believe Tesla will sell about 700,000 vehicles in 2020. Jordan, you believe around 600,000. And we both agree that the coronavirus and cell constraint will play massively as to which one of these figures we're going to be closer to. At the moment, I seem to believe that things are going to be more rosy, that Tesla should be fine, but at the end of the day, I'm just taking a guess. I could be completely wrong, and the chances are I will be wrong, but these are just my estimates for the time being.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary. There's not much I can add to that. Even though we're both very bullish, there's still quite a spread there. But it's interesting that the minimum that we have here between the two of us is 600,000. And I don't think that's too far out of the ballpark. I think they would really have to drop the ball to hit like 550 or be very cell constrained.
Yep, I agree. Well, thanks again, Jordan, for joining the show, and it's sort of good for me to put my estimates out there, but hear about your estimates and just sort of question each other in terms of the thinking as to how we got to those numbers. I mean, our estimates mean nothing. I mean, we could have guessed any number, but it's really the thinking behind it which I find most valuable, and that's really what I wanted to show in this video. So thank you again for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I totally agree. It's good to get somebody else's perspective. The estimates that you provided make me want to change mine a little bit and find somewhere in between, because you make some good points.
And I actually feel the same. Like, after hearing your points, I feel like I should lower certain estimates, but I'll keep them for now. We'll see how things play, and then maybe we can even do a mid-year analysis to see where we're at.
Yeah, that sounds good. It's a good idea.
All right. Well, thanks again, and yeah, we'll talk soon.
All right, cool. Thanks.
Gotcha.
So that's all for today, and thank you to all the Patreons that support the channel. I really appreciate it. Anyway, stay tuned as there's a ton of new content coming out soon. And remember, all content in this video is my opinion only, and we do not recommend buying or selling any financial instruments. So till next time, I'll see you guys soon.